Hey everybody, listen up. Kindly listen to this clip and tell me what's wrong with it.
Fernando de Magallanes fue el primer europeo que llegó al archipiélago en 1521 y lo bautizó con el nombre de las Filipinas, en honor a quien se convertiría en el rey Felipe II de España.
It sounds correct, right? Hey, after all, this is the BBC. Problem is that, well, it's not correct. Magellan named the islands Islas del Poniente and not the Philippines, and he wasn't referring to the entire archipelago, only to the islands he knew at the time. It was Ruy Lopez de Villalobos who named the island Islas de Filipinas, a name that eventually encompassed the entire archipelago, and the country became known as the Philippines. Today we're going to deep dive into a problematic video by the BBC about the Spanish language in the Philippines, as you've just seen. We've actually made a video about it before, but it's in Spanish, as the said BBC video is also in Spanish, presumably targeting a Spanish audience. However, since we saw the said videos being used as justification for some poorly informed and, in our view, misleading articles in social media targeting Filipinos, we decided to wade in English, but in a slightly different format with updates to comply with YouTube rules against reposting the same videos. While the BBC did get some facts right, some, well, they just got wrong, and we'd like to paint a different picture based on the research we presented before in our previous videos. Stick around and see for yourself and see if you agree with us. We will focus on the ones we disagree with and show you the clips plus our comments afterwards. Okay, vamos a empezar.
Así que aprendieron las lenguas locales para dar a conocer el cristianismo y, valiéndose de la experiencia en América, escogieron ciertas lenguas llamadas lenguas generales, que eran las que utilizaban diferentes pueblos para comunicarse entre sí, como sucedía en México con el Nahuatl y en Perú con el Quechua. Y así fue como los misioneros usaron sobre todo tagalo en el área de Manila y cebuano en la isla de Cebú y las islas del centro de Filipinas llamadas Visayas.
This is incorrect. There were no lenguas generales in the Philippines like Nahuatl was in Mexico or Quechua was in Peru. There were hundreds of languages and political entities in the Philippines, with no one dominant kingdom across the archipelago when the Spanish arrived. Rather, the Philippines mostly resembled the situation of the Caribbean islands rather than Mexico or Peru at the time of the arrival of the Spaniards. There was no lengua general over there, but according to research, something like 50 plus distinct languages, of which Taino was the nearest thing to a lengua general, but it did not become that as Spanish became the dominant language. Same is true for the Philippines. There was multilingual and political fragmentation, so it was natural for Spanish to become the common language across a fragmented language landscape, and it took time. So this is not to say that Filipinos switched to Spanish from their local languages. Rather, Filipinos maintained their local language, but the common language of political administration and commerce was Spanish, mostly spoken by educated Filipinos. It was not Tagalog, nor was it Bisaya or Cebuano.
Pues a lo largo de los siglos el español se volvió una lengua confinada a una élite social. En las aldeas, si no había un sacerdote, probablemente nadie habría tenido contacto alguno con el español. Para el siglo XIX, el español era el idioma de la administración y el que se hablaba en los estratos más altos de la población filipina. Pero, ojo, no era el que hablaba la mayoría de la gente.
This is incorrect. Spanish was not the language of the elite per se, but rather of the educated, some of whom were elite for sure, but not all. We have to make a distinction between los educados and las élites. Additionally, we have to add that the Philippines was no different from the situation in Latin America at that time. As we have noted in our previous video, Spanish was not universally spoken in both Latin America and the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period. More widespread education in Spanish only came about as a 19th century phenomenon in both regions. So the premise and the impression created by the BBC is just wrong, and it misinforms. Kindly watch our video about Hispanoamerica and Filipinas to deep dive into this one.
Durante 3 años, Filipinas luchó contra el nuevo poder colonial en la Guerra Filipino-Estadounidense, que fue, por cierto, la primera guerra de liberación nacional del siglo XX. Pero perdieron ¿Y sabes cuál fue una de las primeras medidas que adoptó Estados Unidos una vez terminada la guerra? Pues enviar 2 barcos cargados de maestros para enseñarles inglés a los niños filipinos de todo el archipiélago. Ahora, la gran paradoja en esta historia es que fue precisamente durante esta época cuando el español alcanzó su máximo esplendor en Filipinas.
There are two parts here to unpack. First, it's true that Spanish became more widely spoken, ironically, during the American regime. Our video on Henry Jones Ford and his notes on Spanish in the Philippines, written in 1916, that despite the best efforts of the United States to teach English, it mainly was a classroom phenomenon, as Spanish kept on being spoken in households and outside of school, so it continued to grow. It's not surprising, therefore, that the golden age of Spanish happened during U.S. colonial rule. Secondly, there is an impression that the American teachers were very successful in teaching English, but Henry Jones Ford was saying this. It was sought to be accomplished by the importation of 1,000 American school teachers, although the actual number in the service at one time never reached that figure. So this idea of thousands of teachers pouring into the Philippines teaching English and making it replace Spanish, well, it's a myth. He continues, statistics based upon school reports have been published indicating encouraging progress in the spread of English as the common language of the Philippines, but such statistics are fallacious. We have to discern the propaganda meant to push the narrative that the American colonial administrators were pushing English successfully. As Henry Jones Ford was saying that was not the case. So please watch our video on Spanish, the language that refused to die, for the deep dive into this.
A pesar del plan estadounidense, el español era la lengua de los parlamentarios y la que usaban muchos autores filipinos que escribieron obras literarias súper interesantes. Además, se crearon muchos periódicos y publicaciones en español como símbolo de resistencia ante los estadounidenses. Pero, y aquí está el gran matiz, eso no quiere decir que todo el mundo hablara español. Seguía siendo un idioma de las élites.
Incorrect. Again, Spanish is the language of the educated, which includes the elite, but it's not limited to the elite. So who do you think were reading all those newspapers in the first place? Filipinos were generally well educated at that time, or at the very least, literate. We even note that in his 1914 book, The Philippines Past and Present, Dean Worcester notes that all educated Filipino constables spoke Spanish. So that's why they were being hired. But why would the Americans hire educated Filipino constables who could speak Spanish? It's inescapable. It's because Spanish was more widely spoken than what is imagined right now. And even in the provinces, as by this point, it was a lengua general, not Tagalog, not Visaya, during the early American period. See our video on the Igorot sequences speaks about Don Francisco Muro in 1901, who spoke Spanish, and the depiction by Americans of Filipinos as savages, even though they were educated and politically sophisticated.
Pero además hay una lengua criolla que se llama el Chavacano, que se sigue hablando hoy en día, sobre todo en la península de Zamboanga, en el sureste del archipiélago. Y esta lengua nació precisamente de la convivencia de filipinos, españoles y mexicanos en el siglo XVII.
Here, the BBC errs by omission. Yes, Chavacano is a beautiful language, influenced by Spanish indeed, but the BBC omits the language that was born out of the real coexistence of Filipinos, Spaniards, and Mexicans. This language is actually Filipino Spanish, a unique dialect of the Spanish language that was spoken nationally in the Philippines before, rather than just by a region. Please watch our video about Filipino Spanish and know more about the Filipino dialect of Spanish that is really separate from Chavacano. So, those are the most problematic clips of the video, but please feel free to check out our previous reaction video in Spanish to watch the full BBC episode and our reaction to it. Finally, before you go, we'd like to get your comments as we're thinking of conducting an experiment. We want to document stories of Spanish being spoken in your families, whether indirectly via your reminiscing in story form, or even better, if you have family members still speaking Filipino Spanish, if we can document them via audio or videos that we can surface their stories, their accents, and the sounds of Filipino Spanish. But for this to be successful, we need to get people on board this project, and we hope you can help us with this. To sound off more people about this plan, please feel free to comment below regarding your thoughts or ideas about it. That's all we have for today. Please like and subscribe to support the channel. Vivan los Filipinos! Mabuhay!